Welcome to Pod Planet, a place where things happen that may sound unbelievable, strange, incredible. If you've ever wondered if you were weird or strange or the odd man out, these stories will restore your belief that there are indeed people out there who are weirder, stranger, and odder than you ever imagined. Perhaps you'll find some comfort in that. Bear in mind, every story from Pod Planet is between 83 and 100% true. These are stories we have experienced, survived, and lived to tell about. Let us begin. And now, Pod Planet presents Liars Club. Murdo Crenshaw, 58, successful businessman, married. He drank too much and too often. He liked sex, maybe too much. Crenshaw was a real ladies' man. For example, on this night, he went out for dinner and drinks with a girl from my office, Bertie Miller, who was 31 and single. Bertie worked on Murdo's account, and they were often in each other's company. They've been having a lot of dinners lately, too. I thought nothing of it. A few days passed, and it was the weekend. I began every Saturday morning by reading the local newspaper. And there it was, on page 1. Couldn't miss it. Murdo Crenshaw, local business leader, had passed away in the night. Although I never worked on his account, I met Murdo and his wife, now widow, at various functions. Reading Murdo's obituary made me wonder, what happens when you die? A couple of days later, I saw Bertie. She was the last person to see Murdo alive. She'd just come back from his funeral, dressed in a somber outfit, and in mourning, but not so mournful that she could keep her mouth shut. Speaking through the occasional tear, Bertie told two of the biggest office gossips about her last night with Murdo Crenshaw. And so it goes. Bertie had been having an affair with Crenshaw for 3 weeks. After dinner, Murdo and Bertie took a room at a hotel, and during lovemaking, Crenshaw had had a series of powerful seizures, powerful enough to call for help. Riding in the back of the ambulance on the way to the hospital, Bertie quietly murmured, "Hold on, Murdo." In the emergency room, a young doctor asked Bertie what Murdo had been doing before the seizures. Bertie lied and said something about a meeting or some other nonsense. Seriously. The young doctor disappeared and then reappeared minutes later. He said, "I'm sorry, Mrs. Crenshaw, but despite our best efforts, your husband is gone." Bertie felt like she'd swallowed a golf ball. She wasn't Mrs. Crenshaw, goddammit. Burying her hands in her head, she sobbed, "Oh my God. Oh dear Lord." Then, in a moment of panic, she ran out of emergency and into the night with the young doctor calling her name. "Wait, Mrs. Crenshaw. Come back, Mrs. Crenshaw. Mrs. Crenshaw." Arriving home and pouring herself a stiff drink, Bertie called Murdo's wife, the real Mrs. Crenshaw, to tell her the bad news. Being a valuable part of Murdo's team, Bertie and Mrs. Crenshaw were acquainted, if only in a formal way. "Yes, Bertie. No, Bertie. Oh, my Lord, Bertie. No, Bertie. Say it isn't so, Bertie," said Mrs. Crenshaw upon receiving the news. The women sobbed. After a few minutes of this obsequious back and forth, Mrs. Crenshaw got a grip and said, "Well, thank you for telling me this, Bertie. I'll take over from here." And then she hung up, without even saying goodbye. Crestfallen, Bertie slumped on her Chesterfield and wondered. She tried to make sense of what had happened, but couldn't. Then she fell into a sound sleep. Two months later, Bertie. Her recovery from Murdo's death was quick, because Bertie was now dating a new fella who she met at a bowling alley. Thankfully, he was young, single, and unconnected with her professional life. The widow Crenshaw. Through the grapevine, I found out the widow Crenshaw had long despised her husband Murdo and had hoped he would one day expire in the arms of an adulteress like Bertie. Now, the widow Crenshaw was moving to Bermuda with the young man who cleaned her pool. Which takes us to Murdo. Murdo Crenshaw, gone at 58. Did he go to heaven, or hell, or limbo? Or maybe none of the above? Me? I like to speculate, and in my imaginary version of Murdo's afterlife, he dies and meets the Buddha, who explains everything. Then sometime later, Murdo Crenshaw is reincarnated. He is reborn, grows up with a new name and body, and is today a 22-year-old living in California. The reincarnated Murdo Crenshaw is lean, fit, and a vegetarian. He eschews alcohol, sugar, caffeine, and all the usual demons. But he has one weakness: sex. As in his prior life, as Murdo Crenshaw, it's an itch he can't stop scratching. You've been listening to Pod Planet Season 1. Pod Planet is written and produced by Peter McHugh and Clive Desmond. Audio and digital support for Pod Planet comes from Oliver Wickham and Aidan Vickery, two of the best and brightest young minds in audio today. Theme music for Pod Planet Season 1 was composed and produced by Richard Suddy, aka Telegraphy, from Detroit. Look for Telegraphy's FMA link in the credits section of our webpage. Richard Suddy is an amazing artist, and you'll want to hear more Telegraphy. Every Pod Planet episode contains some fantastic original music, much of which is courtesy FMA. If you'd like to hear or know more about the composers from this or any episode of Pod Planet, look for their links in the episode credits section of our webpage. These musicians are amazing, and you'll want to take a listen to their work. And special thanks again to FMA.org. And if you haven't subscribed to Pod Planet yet, subscribe now. Go to our webpage, podplanet.org, Podplanet's one word, and click on subscribe or hit follow on whatever podcatcher app you're using. You'll find Pod Planet on Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, SoundCloud, iTunes, Libsyn, YouTube, and many others. And follow Pod Planet on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Links on our webpage. Pod Planet is part of PRX, the Public Radio Exchange. So if you're a radio station that would like to add Pod Planet to your schedule, look us up at prx.org. PRX can set it all up. We love to hear from listeners, so please leave your thoughts or questions in the comments section on our webpage. And be sure to recommend Pod Planet to your friends. Send them our link, podplanet.org. Pod Planet would like to thank Lydia, Lola, and Tattoo Sound and Music in Toronto, as well as extra special thanks to Monique Kelly for her guidance, insight, and never-ending support. This is Pod Planet Season 1. We'll be back in 2 weeks with a new and startling episode. Until then, on behalf of Peter McHugh and the whole Pod Planet team, thanks for listening. I'm Clive Desmond.